Hi, this is Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about The Quiet Year, which is a story game which I believe should be required reading for every active dungeon master. Okay, so The Quiet Year is a very unusual game. It is a story game. It was created by Joe McDaldno, okay? And so the way I came across it was there's a gentleman by the name of Adam Cobell. And Adam, he is one of the creators for Dungeon World. So he's a brilliant writer, a great member of the tabletop role-playing game community. And so he had a really cool Twitter thread that gave his top 3 tabletop role-playing games, and then opened it up to other people to jump in and say, what are your favorite top 3 tabletop role-playing games? And so that Twitter thread, I've actually done an entire video on that Twitter thread alone. But that Twitter thread is like it's like a sommelier's guide to tabletop role-playing games, the very best that have ever been written. And it's a really important Twitter thread, and I think it's really the best consolidation of the best tabletop role-playing games that have ever been written. And The Quiet Year popped up all over that list, and I had never heard of it, right? So I looked it up, and I got a copy. So The Quiet Year is created by Joe McDaldno, and it is available on his site, Buried Without Ceremony, for $8 as a PDF. Okay, so that's how you can get it if you want to get a copy. And actually, so it's important to understand. So I do want to make sure it's clear here. So a lot of people listed this as a tabletop role-playing game, but I don't believe it's actually a tabletop role-playing game at all. So in my opinion, a tabletop role-playing game has 3 things. It has a tabletop. It is played at a physical table where people are actually gathered together. That is the first and primary criteria to determine if you're actually in a tabletop role-playing game, if you're playing a tabletop role-playing game. The next is there's role-playing, right? So that you have characters and you have classes and they have races and you role-play their stories together. And the last is it has a game master. And in my opinion, this is what disqualifies The Quiet Year from being a tabletop role-playing game. So I don't think it's really a tabletop role-playing game at all. And I'm pointing that out because I'm pointing every active dungeon master in the world to get a hold of this and read it and study it and incorporate a lot of ideas from it. I think it's really critical for active role players to have read this, and it's only about 15 pages long, okay? But it's but actually, I have 3 words to describe it. It's beautiful, it's succinct, and it's brilliant. It is really a very, very important game that all active dungeon masters should read. But it's not a tabletop role-playing game, and I have to admit too, because I'm pointing people to it, I don't intend I'll ever play it. And the only reason why is I feel that labels are useful in many cases. I know a lot of people don't like labels, but I'm a writer, so I love words, right? So, and I really feel that words have freight and they have meaning. And so, tabletop role-playing game is a distinct thing. And I think one of the issues that we're seeing right now is Gen Con right now. If you were to ask if that was a tabletop role-playing game convention, you might have some people argue with you that it's really a video game convention, or that's actually really a board game convention now. I think there was a day when it was a tabletop role-playing game. So if you don't allow words to contain the freight that they should contain, things get messy. And so basically, my take on The Quiet Years is that it's a story game, okay? And it's absolutely required reading for any active dungeon master because it's so brilliant and what it's going to teach. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But I have a problem with story games. One of the reasons why I really don't play story games is I feel they're all like low-budget science fiction movies. They almost always have a bad ending. And The Quiet Year doesn't escape that, okay? But from the perspective of rules design and from the perspective of a few other aspects, this thing is absolutely brilliant, and it has to be seen. All right, so there's a lot of provisos there, but let's go ahead and jump into it, okay? So the story, The Quiet Year, is a story of one specific community that you create during 1 year in an apocalyptic setting, okay? And so basically, it uses cards to generate events, right? That's another thing is like the Quiet Year is really about telling collaborative stories together, right? So that in that vein, it's very, very much like Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, so basically, since there are 52 cards, that takes you through the full year, and you actually see every week through the year, right? There's a couple little details that are specific to the game that are not really relevant, but a standard card play deck will walk you right through an entire year for this community, and it's really incredible the way that it is structured so that players will play a story to gain, will tell a story together, and that really needs to be seen. I think already I can tell you, I think there are ideas from Quiet Year that are in other tabletop role-playing games, but it's absolutely critical to see. Okay, so what is in it, right? So one, you want to see how you can tell the story of an entire year with a simple card game and allow players to make choices on what events occur in your year. The structure for that in the Quiet Year is absolutely fantastic. All right. Also, just the idea of using cards. Like, cards are really underused in tabletop role-playing games, and I've never been sure why. They're so powerful. One problem that I think they do come with is they really have their own themes. Card decks really have their own themes, and so sometimes that can be a little hard to match. But once I've seen how much you can do with this, I really think we should be using cards in more tabletop role-playing games, because they're such powerful, simple, elegant differentiators, and we need those in tabletop role-playing games. All right, so what will you actually... Oh, all right, so let's talk a little bit more about why every active Dungeon Master needs to read the Quiet Year. Well, one of the reasons that every active Dungeon Master needs to read the Quiet Year is because of contention. Contention was one of the most elegant rules I've ever seen written into any game. So basically what happens in the Quiet Year is when you get to a point where another player, and there are only players, there isn't a game master, big problem with the game, but it's part of it. So when another player does something you don't like, you don't talk about it, right? You just grab a stone. So the game has a pool of stones at the center of the table, and when somebody does something you don't like, you grab a stone from the center of the table, and you now have a contention count. Your contention count would be 1. If you were to grab another stone, you would have a contention count of 2, right? Now you can do things with this contention count, right? So 1, before you can do anything else with it, it triggers something, right? So without saying a word, everyone at the table knows that someone has done something that another player doesn't like. This is brilliant. It doesn't interrupt play, but it communicates something to everyone at the table. That is so useful in tabletop role-playing games, okay? In addition to this, your contention builds, right? So as the game goes forward, your contention is building, right? And so that's a mechanic that can be used, and you can leverage that, right? In addition to that, having certain numbers of contention triggers different things, right? So you can have triggers based on numbers, or different effects based on the stones. So do half the players have stones? Do all the players have stones? Do none of the players have stones? Do those trigger things? Also, you can take actions which reduce tension and move stones from the player back to the pool in the center of the table. This is so ripe to be used really well in so many tabletop role-playing games. It's a brilliant, brilliant idea. Okay. All right. Next is what is done in the Quiet Year concerning community. So this is really another brilliant, brilliant part of the Quiet Year. Is the Quiet Year, as a dungeon master, it will explain to you what communities mean in a communal, in a collaboratively told story. And so you can see, what do events mean to a community? What are the structures of community, right? What are the resources that communities have? What causes confrontations in communities, right? And so once you've seen this, I think going forward, every village, every town, every city that you build into your tabletop role-playing games will be richer, and they will be more prepared and configured to actually fit into a drama, right? And that's what your story really is. Your story is a drama, okay? On any good tabletop Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game. And then last is mapping. The game has a brilliant mapping technique that is really, really well done, and encourages different players to get involved in mapping, and that is a great idea as well. So Absolutely, The Quiet Year is required reading for any active Dungeon Master, and I think it's a really critical building tool for active tabletop role-playing game players. Thank you.